Hi, hello, my name's Ollie Bliss and this is my channel, Book Draw. For those who don't know, I enjoy looking at queer fiction and occasionally I create images out of it. And today I am discussing Orson Scott Card's Songmaster. So I've already done an artwork against this one, so you can watch a video of that, and a link will be up here and down in the description below. But this is giving a review of the book and my thoughts surrounding it. So in this book, we have this character here who is Ansett, who is what is referred to as a songbird. And a songbird is someone who has a particular talent for singing, but above and beyond their kind of normal ability for a wonderful choir voice, they actually have a kind of power within it. And to actually obtain the name Songbird, you have to be pretty damn good at this kind of level of singing. And for those who have this ability to sing, they are taken away to the songhouse and they're trained up, and some of them meet the mark and others don't. And he goes through this process of being mentored by Deseret, I think that's how you say her name, and she kind of plays a bit of a mothering figure, but she also treats him, teaches him the qualities of control. And I wanted to just explain that in a little bit by just delving into the book itself. A river comes up into this valley, pouring into the water. It has no place to go, so it fills up. Until some spills out at the waterfall, it can fill no deeper than its lowest point. Ansett, this is control. Stop looking at the lake, Ansett, if the lake tells you nothing. So Ansett looked at the trees, at the birds and the hills. He looked around at the hills and he knew that Deseret wanted him to know. The water pours out of the low place, and, not enough yet, if the low place were higher, the lake would be deeper, and if the low place were lower, there wouldn't be a lake. So that just gives you a little bit of hopefully a metaphorical explanation of what this control is about. This kind of this thing which is held within themselves as a vessel, and the way in which they are able to draw from it, from this deep internal place within them. And it's based on a mixture of their experiences, their memories, who they are as individuals and how they have been treated by others, but also it enables a framework which can be articulated to other people, and it can be used in him creating warnings or a battle cry, or creating a healing sense and building empathy between people. So, like, as a construct, it's really quite beautiful, but it's also quite manipulative through his song, where he's creating this emotional connection which resonates through and permeates entire crowds in some cases, and it can change their thinking, it can make them cry, it can make them fall to pieces, it can make them basically kill themselves at its worst. So it's a pretty big power that this person has, and he is a very desirable commodity, and he is trained up to be purchased by people who can truly experience and understand his talent and can register it within their soul. So that he is taken away to this emperor who basically pretty much falls in love with him. And what's important to also acknowledge is that songbirds only have this kind of period of time where they have this kind of fragility and beauty. He's he takes this drug which suppresses his ability to go through puberty, and so at the age of 15 he looks like a 10-year-old, and this emperor forms a very strong connection and bond with him, and without going into too much detail, there is a bond and a relationship there, but it does not turn sexual, but it is playing with that idea within the writing, and Ansett is feels threatened by another guard who has a sense of desire for him, and then the consequences is the guard is in some serious trouble. Also, what I should have said at the beginning is that this book was actually written back in the late 70s. I think it was 1978. Yeah, 1978. So this is a book of its time in terms of how things are described and understood. And Orson Scott Card actually wanted to write this because he wanted to be able to say that he could write in any voice, because he was his ancestry is from a Norman family, and his great-great-grandfather was some prolific Mormon icon, so he had that kind of religious background entrenched within him. But so I'm going to cross over into spoiler territory, just discussing the second half. So that just gives you a bit of context about the book for now, if that's as far as you want to progress. But then, so in the second half, he basically does form a relationship with a guy who's only slightly older than him, but bearing in mind that he actually looks 5 years younger than himself. But they end up sleeping together, and as a result of that, it causes Ansat excruciating pain. He becomes impotent and unable to have sex, and his counterpart Joseph, who he fell in love with, is castrated. So that happened, but it kind of perpetuates the consequence of having same-sex relations is wrong and will lead you to be castrated either physically or emotionally. That kind of like summarizes some of the stuff that happens in the book. I found this book because I really enjoyed Ender's Game. The themes in the dialogue and in the story and the plot is all about creating an understanding of things which are other, and not feeling necessarily threatened or afraid of those things which aren't of what you know. He hasn't done massive amount of responses to this subject, but he has frequently and historically spoken out against the homosexual agenda. And I'll just read out a couple of highlights. I will include this article because when I was reading this, I was like, what is this? This is awful. And this goes back only as far as 2008, where he was labelled a homophobe because of his position on homosexuality, and he was very vocal on the fight against gay marriage in recent years. He claimed most homosexuals are self-loathing victims of child abuse who became gay through disturbing seduction or rape or molestation or abuse. I am not one of those gay men. He argued that gay marriage marks the end of democracy in America, that homosexuality was a tragic genetic mix-up. Counter-argument, a progressive evolutionary trait to help reduce overpopulation. How about that? And allows courts to redefine marriage was a slippery slope towards total homosexual political rule. Yeah, we're taking over. So, and it just goes on, and I mean, please do read this. In the kind of lead up to the promotion of his film, he argued...
The only reason I'm being attacked for it is because Ender's Game is coming out as a movie. So that was something that was going to get a lot of publicity for the people attacked. Criticism. I've had savage, lying, deceptive personal attacks, but no actual criticism because they've never addressed any of my actual ideas. That's their privilege, but character assassination seems to be the only political method that is in use today. And I don't play that game. And you can't defend against it. All you can do is try to offer ideas, and for those who want to listen to ideas, great. For those who simply want to punish you for not falling in line with their dogmas, there's really not much you can do about it.
So in that clip he's saying basically that if you want to have conversation about ideas, that's great, but like if you just want to punish someone because they don't fall in line with your dogmatic way of thinking, there's not a lot that you can do about that. And to a degree, I understand that situation. As someone who embraces same-sex relations, and when you are confronted with someone who has very dogmatic views about being anti-same-sex relations, that can be very difficult to move beyond from. But he also said something else earlier, back in the 1990s, which was kind of a combination of responding to previous things that he had written about. And I really want to pick this a bit apart in terms of, because I thought what he said was actually quite clever, because he distances himself from a level of accountability, and he's actually talking about society's structures and how they enforce and decide how we behave, and those who do not behave in line with that are likely to experience consequences. So he says, those who flagrantly violate society's regulations of sexual behaviour cannot be permitted to remain as acceptable equal citizens within that society. So that was from the 1990s, and when I first initially saw that, I was like, what? And then I took a moment, and what he's actually saying, if you put it out there and you're disregarding what is deemed as acceptable behaviour amongst your peer group of people, society's norms, that group will reject that behaviour, and you will not be treated as an equal member of the peer group because you are sitting outside of that way of thinking and behaving. And that, in essence, is like quite a true statement. However, that's not really addressing the issue for me. The issue is, why preach hatred towards people in same-sex relations in any spectrum of the LGBT plus community, the queer community? Why contribute to that narrative with such hostility? And what I find very strange within this is that actually through his writing he's very sympathetic and empathetic to their situation. He can see that there is a loving relationship and they have these desires, these internalized desires which they cannot control, they have no control over, but it is consensual between the pair of them, and they both know what they're basically signing up for to a degree. I don't think actually Ansett was fully aware that if he was to engage in having a sexual, in going for a sexual act, that he would be made impotent, which is also interesting in terms of his age and what Card is saying around his, the age of that character, or how he presents himself, because he actually presents himself as someone who is younger because of the drugs, but he is older, and that whole thing is super messy and weird. So the next bit which I wanted to look at is how he's kind of removed his accountability with society, and I'm going to draw in a parallel discussion because it's around sexual behaviour, and this might feel left field to begin with, but please stay with me. So this was a TED Talk which was done by Juno Mac, who is who has worked as a prostitute and now runs a collective in the UK which is about the rights of prostitutes. So she's looking for a new model of behaviour and the way prostitution and the sex industry is treated, and is basically asking for the decriminalisation. And in this TED Talk, which I'll add so you can see, she talks about 4 different models.
I'm not like most of the people you'll have heard speaking about prostitution before. I'm not a police officer or a social worker. I'm not an academic, a journalist, or a politician. The first approach is full criminalisation. Half the world, including Russia, South Africa, and most of the US, regulates sex work by criminalizing everyone involved. The second approach to regulating sex work seen in these countries is partial criminalization, where the buying and selling of sex are legal, but surrounding activities like brothel keeping or soliciting on the street are banned. Third approach I want to talk about, the Swedish or Nordic model of sex work law. The idea behind this law is that selling sex is intrinsically harmful, and so you're in fact helping sex workers by removing the option. Despite growing support for what's often described as the end-demand approach, there's no evidence that it works. Something I'm often hearing is, prostitution would be fine if we made it legal and regulated it. We call that approach legalization, and it's used by countries like the Netherlands, Germany, and Nevada in the US. But it's not a great model for human rights. We've looked at full criminalization, partial criminalization, the Swedish or Nordic model, and legalization, and how they all cause harm. Something I never hear asked is, what do sex workers want? After all, we're the ones most affected by these laws. New Zealand decriminalised sex work in 2003. It's crucial to remember that decriminalisation and legalisation are not the same thing. Decriminalisation means the removal of laws that punitively target the sex industry, instead treating sex work much like any other kind of work.
So the reason why I'm comparing this is because this isn't related to sexuality, but it is related to the subject of sex. And what she's advocating for is consideration for the rights of those individuals who choose to do that for themselves. And so she used the example from New Zealand, where there have been a collaboration between the New Zealand collective of prostitutes who have actually built a set of rights for themselves. And it's through that collaboration where they've actually asked prostitutes themselves what they want, what sex workers want.
In New Zealand, people can work together for safety, and employers of sex workers are accountable to the state. A sex worker can refuse to see a client at any time, for any reason. And 96% of street workers report that they feel the law protects their rights.
So she's talking about equality and fairness, and the things that if you're not a part of that industry, but you believe in equality and fairness, be an ally and support us.
We need more allies. If you care about gender equality, or poverty, or migration, or public health, then sex worker rights matter to you. Make space for us in your movements. That means not only listening to sex workers when we speak, but amplifying our voices. Resist those who silence us, those who say that a prostitute is either too victimized, too damaged to know what's best for herself.
Across the globe is a range of different views about how we respond to concepts of sexuality and just the act of sex, not necessarily with regards to same-sex relations, to just having sex. And that is different, and people have different opinions about it across the world. She's looking for rights which actually extend the rights of all people, and which is also mainly protecting the rights of the people that it directly affects. And I feel, in terms of, if I want to engage in same-sex with my partner, that should just be a conversation between ourselves. We're both adults and we're consenting, and it doesn't actually affect other people. And that, in kind of the principle, is very similar in terms of what she's describing. There is an impact when you contribute to the narratives which don't actually amplify those people's voices and actually create silence and prevents safe spaces for those people. And what I'll compare this to, the main reason why I'm using this as a direct comparison, there are lots of places across the world where it is still illegal to be gay, but in this book, If You Could Be Mine, it actually discusses what it's like living in contemporary society right now in a religious state where it is illegal to be having same-sex relations. So by having the act, you can actually be hung. There's a recent example back in 2016, Hassan Assar, who was 19, who was hung in an Iraq prison. So this isn't something which is back when this was published, back in the end of the 70s, 1978, this is happening right now, and it is a negative consequence of those narratives which are being perpetuated and reinforced and are seen in law and protected by law and state. And that's terrifying for me personally, because it enables people to be hung as a result. So what I'm suggesting is that by contributing to this type of narrative, you are enabling this type of outcome. And in this book, the person, she has a best friend who she loves dearly, and she is considering gender reassignment because through state they can actually be supported to gain gender reassignment, because in the Quran there's nothing to say if you were born in the wrong gender, you're wrong. So the state actually tries to support those people in their gender reassignment to make sure that they can maintain healthy heteronormative relationships. To be fair, Orson Scott Card wrote Songmaster back in 1978. There was a lot of activity happening around that time, but Orson Scott Card chose to amplify those voices which were about restricting the rights of particularly same-sex relationships between men. And he did publish other articles where he was saying that it's super wrong. But then a lot of the themes within this book and some of his other parts where he's writing highlight a lot of self-shame and hatred. And there is this issue around sexual abuse, which is reoccurring in his writing. And it screams to me that this is someone who is very conflicted in himself about his thoughts on sexuality and how he identifies with it. That's just an assumption, like that it's not founded on anything other than the things that he's presented. But it just to me there appears to be more going on than why he is championing this kind of way of framing sexuality, and I found it really, really confusing. If he is of a generation and he came from this religious background, if he is someone who is conflicted with his own sexuality and he feels incredibly trapped and like is in a marriage where he has procreated to be a moral citizen, but he's not satisfied in his sex life, that must be a really sad existence. But what was particularly problematic about this particular book at the time was that he was using his platform and his voice to articulate things on behalf of others that he didn't represent. And it is subtle and it is insidious in terms of the way it's framed, but it does depict a narrative of, if you behave this way, this is the result of your life. Of the way your life will be, in terms of having this voice, this power, this songbird, this songmaster, this way of articulating your own views and how that can influence others and how that can permeate through others and it can resonate through others. And it's just really sad that this is the voice and the song that he chose to sing, and there are so many other more positive song choices out there. Just to give a couple examples: Born This Way, I Am What I Am, This Is Me, all great songs. Let's go for some of those instead of this. So hopefully that's ending on a more lighter note, but I'm just really interested in other people's views, because I don't know what I think and feel about this whole thing, and how it sits in time, and how that I'm reading it as someone of a different period of time and with a different lens to be looking at the world, and what it means. But I do think there are some interesting lessons about this in the time that it is in, and how it links to the way in which we look at society as a whole, and how we can enforce upon others, but also how we have that individual power within ourselves to make change and sing new songs. Okay, enough from me. Till next time, see you soon. Bye.